Think tank and advocacy organization. We have a live studio audience of young and old, people who have been in the education reform world for a long time, and some who are newcomers and energized. And we also have a worldwide video audience on the live webcast, which will be available on our website for re-looking at any time soon after this session ends. We are also inviting the worldwide audience, if you wish, to tweet in your questions when we get to the question and answer part at #ANationAtRisk. We will have, after Bill Bennett speaks, we will have an opportunity for conversation and questions from the live audience and from the worldwide audience that's on video. This is today's a particular pleasure for me because there is nobody I have liked more, respected more, or worked more closely with over a very long period of time now than Bill Bennett. Former Secretary of Education, of course, but so many other things. Biography of him is in the material you picked up, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on introductions. He is pretty well known in a whole variety of circles, including radio and TV, education circles, and reader circles, and parent circles, and grandparent circles, because to paraphrase something that George Will said when the late Pat Moynihan died, Will said of Moynihan, he's written more books than most of his colleagues in the Senate have ever read. Well, I think Bill Bennett has written more books than maybe the younger members of the audience have ever read. And a new one is coming out next week, by the way. Is College Worth It? By William J. Bennett. Talk about a troublemaker willing still to stir the pot, ask the tough questions, and challenge some of our prevailing assumptions about education. And some of the shibboleths that people hoist up and others take for granted, and that really deserve to be thought about and re-examined. So I had the huge pleasure of working with Bill on a terrific Department of Education team starting in 1985. In the second Reagan term, we have stayed in pretty good touch since then. We've co-authored stuff together, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, Secretary of Education William J. Bennett.
Thank you. You started by stealing one of my lines, but I've stolen so many from you. Whenever anything happened in education, Checker was there, I'd say, "What do I say? What do I say?" And he would tell me what to say. And often I would follow his advice. But I was going to thank Secretary or Assistant Secretary Troublemaker, who's been making his own share of trouble for some time. Thank you very much. Thanks to Fordham. Thanks to AEI. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to do three things. A little memory, a little walk down memory lane, a bit like what you were just doing, Checker. And then trends in the last 30 years. Most of you know this, so I'll do that quickly. And then a few general considerations and some substantive thoughts, conclusions, courtesy of someone else, because a debt needs to be paid here today to someone who is not here. First of all, on the memory lane thing, it's a little bit like movie tone news. Nice to see the reunion. Some of you haven't changed at all. Others are barely recognizable. I'm not going to say who is which. But Justice Holmes, when he was asked at 90 how he felt, he said, "Well, one good thing, there are fewer and fewer people to whom I must defer." And I think Milt Goldberg, you're about it here in the room, Milt. And you're right, we had some great fun. The Nation at Risk was great, but then we did some great reports. The What Works series, lots of things that we had a lot of fun with that I think still work. 30 years ago, I don't know if it was yesterday, but I know this. I know I have a staff at radio now who were not born when A Nation at Risk came out. David, right? We're 6 years yet to come before you were born. And I was at an age where lots of military people retire. I was 39, so that gives you some sense of the discrepancies. Anyway, I remember it well. It was a great inheritance from Terrell Bell and Ronald Reagan. The video's great with the lead-in by Reagan and the coming out at the exit by Reagan. And it was a great thing to inherit and to work with. We were very grateful for it. I was so impressed with the report because it was one of the few reports that was mostly nouns and verbs. It was so well written by scientists mostly. I think Milton and a few scientists, right? Milton won't say. And Terrell Bell, of course. That's the way we secretaries do. We hire good people to help us write things. Anyway, it was so well done. It was so clear, and it was an alarm bell in the night or in the morning, and it really did, as you said in the video checker, probably have the most profound effect of any report in the history of American education. We took it very, very seriously. I was at the National Endowment for the Humanities at the time. That was my first job in Washington. I was chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Elaine and I had just come to Washington. We were happy to get it. We were happy to read it. We were happy to use it. When I became Secretary of Education, we tried to incorporate a number of the lessons from A Nation at Risk into what we were doing. I talked about the 3 C's, content and character and choice. And indeed, the Nation at Risk report was very heavy on the content part. Talked about the kinds of courses that students should take, number of years of study, and the like. I hope we were true and faithful to that idea. And exactly, let's talk about the content for a second, because I want to plant a couple of ideas early. In exactly that year, 1983, when that report was issued, I had a survey. It wasn't as well known, but I remember it well, and others may remember it too. I did a survey at the National Endowment for the Humanities. I wrote 250 people, writers, intellectuals, people all across the political spectrum, left, right, and middle, and asked them, what are the 10 books that every high school student should be familiar with by the time they finish high school? Some of you may remember this. Got the list back. One of the people I wrote was George Will, and he put it in a column, so we got about 10,000 more responses than the 250, which was very welcome. And that one of the remarkable things about the response was the consensus. There was a consensus on at least 4 or 5 titles by almost everyone who responded. Almost everyone who responded, let me just read this right the way I said it in 1983. I've long suspected there's more consensus on what the important books are than many people have been willing to admit. We talk about how many differences there are between us, but I wanted to test the proposition. So in order to test it, I invited several hundred educational and cultural leaders to recommend 10 books that any high school graduate should have read. They listed hundreds of different texts and authors, yet 4 were cited almost all the time. The Bible, Shakespeare's plays, American historical documents like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, and the great American novel, Huckleberry Finn, believe it or not, were cited the most times. That's the beginning of, if you will, a down payment on the idea of content. And interesting that so many people from so many different perspectives could agree on that. By the way, not a bad education there. It kind of resembles the heart of Abraham Lincoln's education. If you know Lincoln, you know what he went back to all the time: the Bible, Shakespeare, and the founding documents. We won't get into the Common Core right now. We can do that in Q&A. But if one were to devise a Common Core, ab initio, this would not be a bad place to start, would it? I think not. Anyway, it was great. It was a great response, and we started to talk about those 3 C's: content, character, and choice. When I became Secretary of Education, I was impressed with the Assistant Secretary, Checker Finn's notions and Milt's notion and others that we really needed to do something about standards. And he told me about something I'd never heard of called NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And so we've really got to beef this thing up. And the first way we beef it up is put some money into it. The second, we need some leadership. So we appointed new leadership to NAEP. The chairman was a governor from Tennessee named Lamar Alexander, and the vice chairman was the wife of a governor from Arkansas named Hillary Rodham Clinton, and that's how she got her start. I just want you all, let this be remembered for whatever, right, okay, and maybe I'm held accountable, and either way you want it. As Secretary of Education, I tried to talk about these 3 C's, content, character, and choice, and tried to do so in a way that would have some impact. It was then I got the most important advice I ever got in my job from my wife, Elaine, who is ageless, as you can see. She said to me, Elaine said to me, don't just stand there and make pronouncements. Find out what you're talking about first. And I said, why should I be different from the other guys in Washington? She said, because you're the Secretary of Education, do your homework. And I said, what do you want me to do? And Elaine said, go to class, go to school, teach classes, show respect to the teachers, show respect for the subject matter, talk to students, talk to administrators, talk to parents. I said, Elaine, I am the Secretary of Education of the United States. I don't do retail, I do wholesale. Elaine, the daughter of a very successful businessman, said, do good retail and you'll do better wholesale. And so I did. I visited about 120, 130 schools in those 3 years, and I've stayed at visiting schools. Some of my school friends are here in the audience, our friends from Maine. Peter, good to see you. Ted, others. And we visited every state. I have been everywhere. When most people say, where'd you go to school around Washington, the answer they're expecting and the people give is college. I want to know where they went to high school, because the odds are I was there or have been there and visited and taught a class on the Federalist Papers. It was a great experience, and latest count, I'm between 400 and 600 schools now that I have visited. It was great advice, and I learned a lot, made friends who are still friends. I see one right here, Pauline Hamlet, one of the first schools we visited, Amadon Elementary School, right here in the district. We got on, what was it, the cheese bus, is that what we call it? Talked to Federalist Papers, went over at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Yeah, that was a more dramatic one than a lot of them, but I remember that very well. Anyway, okay, that was a couple of the ways we did the job. I want to go back to NEH for one more thing, which I want to plant before I get to some of these trends. When I was chairman of NEH, the process was people who applied for government money, research grants, individual projects, big projects, reviewed by panels, and then the Council of the National Endowment would recommend whether to fund or not. There was a very interesting proposal that came up, now it can be told, from the University of Virginia, from a scholar named E.D. Hirsch. It was reviewed by a review panel, given pretty good reviews, but my council didn't like it and unanimously voted against it. I overruled the council, and I said, I think this guy Hirsch is on to something. You know, twice a day, even a broken clock, right? I got some things right. I also funded something called Brooklyn Bridge by a young filmmaker who's now made films about baseball and the Civil War and other things. He ran up to me once in an airplane and said, you gave me my start, Mr. Bennett, you gave me my start. I said, thank you, Mr. Burns. Thank you very much, Ken Burns. But I didn't give E.D. Hirsch a start. I didn't give Don Hirsch a start, but I think we gave him some forward motion and some big money to support his project on core knowledge, the notion of core knowledge. So, this is 30 years ago. I had been talking about the idea of content at the NEH. Certainly the Nation at Risk report was very big, very strong on this issue. And here was Hirsch beginning his work and beginning to have a national influence. Let's talk about trends over 30 years. You can look at the numbers yourself. Checker and Mike Petrilli and others have done an excellent job of summarizing it. They sent me their papers that they've written, the summaries of the trends over the last 30 years. And, you know, it is pretty much what it is. I saw that Rick Hess said if we were on the 25-yard line before, we're on the 30-yard line now, still in our own territory, not in theirs. And maybe it's the 35 or 40, as Mrs. Bennett said this morning, maybe the 45. But just a few numbers. NAEP reading scores 1984, 9-year-olds, 211. For 2008, 9-year-olds, 220. That's 24 years. That's some progress, from 211 to 220. For 13-year-olds, 257 to 260. 17-year-olds, 289 to 286. You'll see this pattern again. NAEP math from 82 to 2008, 26 years. 9-year-olds, 219 in 82, 243 in 2008. That's good. 269 for 13-year-olds in 82, 281 in 2008. Okay, and then we get to the 17-year-olds, 298, 306. Notice as we get older, that progress decreases. SAT average score, 1983 math, 494. 2011, 514. SAT average score reading, this is depressing, 503 in 1983, 497 in 2011. AP scores, 3.10 for 1986, 2.91 for 2011. Of course, there are a lot more students taking the AP. That needs to be acknowledged as well. The world has gotten more competitive. The rest of the globe is not standing still. American education is not moving fast enough or quickly enough. Issue of The Economist, I guess about a month ago, David, was it? Talking about Scandinavian countries and how they're adopting a number of education reforms. Not 2 paragraphs into an article in The Economist about Scandinavian ideas, and the name Milton Friedman comes up twice. Who would have ever thought putting Scandinavia and Milton Friedman together? But lo and behold, they're taking some ideas from that old wizard. Those are some of the trends, and they are pretty much, I think they are pretty much typical of what we see. What we see is, and I remember Checker saying this when we first looked at, I think it was a Tim's report. I said, what do you conclude from this? He said, the longer you stay in school in America, the dumber you get relative to kids in other countries. Not maybe entirely true now. Maybe you get a little smarter, but as you get older, the gains seem to disappear or vanish. We seem to have some more agreement, perhaps, maybe that's it, on what to do for 9-year-olds than we do for 13-year-olds, and certainly than we do for 17-year-olds. Maybe that is part of it. But it's certainly not a all bleak picture. A lot of things have happened, which have been good, exciting, fun, and have made a difference in the lives of a lot of people. We have our great schools now. We have our rocket ship schools, our basis schools, our KIPS. I'm very impressed with Teach for America. I think there should be more Teach for America teachers hired. One of the little-known facts about Teach for America and about America is how many young people of talent apply to Teach for America. 18% of Harvard seniors apply to Teach for America. 20% at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Same at Brown and the other universities. It's extraordinary. And most of these kids don't make it. Very high standards. It would be a wonderful thing if the teacher ranks could be a little more welcoming to the Teach for America graduates. Well, they say, who was it? Somebody said these are educational tourists. They come in for 2 years or 3 years, and then they leave. Fine. Take their money, take their brain power, take their energy. I'm saying an analogy that tourists come take their money. 22, 23, 24-year-old, idealistic, smart young people from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or Harvard, take them for 2 years, 3 years, take them for as long as you can get them. Pump up that energy, use that idealism. Interestingly, what is it, 40% of them stay? They stay in the classroom and they stay in the profession. If we have a teacher shortage, it's because we're artificially limiting access to teaching. What else? I have to say, because I just was there a week ago, somebody's trying to do all of the good reforms at once out in Douglas County, Colorado. We shall see. This will be challenged, but it is a remarkable group of people in Douglas County who are trying to do choice, accountability, high standards, and they're doing remarkable work. These kinds of things are happening, have happened in the last 30 years, and they're encouraging. Nothing quite like Douglas County, I don't think, and that bears watching and a lot of attention. I'm very impressed with what they're doing. We have, on that second C, seen a tremendous movement towards school choice. Charters are growing and expanding. Nina Reese was on my radio show yesterday, day before, talked about the growth in charter schools. More and more Americans are doing what only Catholics used to do, I guess, or wealthy people used to do, which is getting that choice of schools and exercising that choice. Homeschooling is growing and with it the sophistication of homeschoolers and the achievement of homeschoolers. We've had inroads in the culture and education. Who knew that movies would break through on education? Stand and Deliver, my hero, Jaime Escalante, whom we visited in Los Angeles, still one of my favorite stories of all time. Lean on Me, the story of Joe Clark, whom we visited in New Jersey, the principal of that middle school there. Waiting for Superman, which I think has made a real impact in the culture and people's thinking about education. What's the impact? I think the American people now understand that there is something seriously wrong, that there should be more choice in education, and I think an important distinction, though people may think it's slight, people now understand there's a difference between teachers' unions and teachers, and that the interests of teachers and teachers' unions may not always be the same thing. The Puritans believed a community of sinners could still make a great church. We now understand that a group of teachers, even very fine people committed to the education of children, can form themselves into an organization which is not always friendly to the interests of children. There's been a lot of writing on that. There's been a lot of literature on that. There's been a lot of talk about that, and I think it has been getting through. As Checker tells us all the time, we now judge by outcomes, not by inputs, not by salaries, not by how many students, what the degrees of the teachers are, but by learning outputs. This has led to other controversies. An argument I have found incredible lately in the press is you can't have standards and tests because it tempts people to cheat. Well, maybe you shouldn't have private property. It tempts people to steal. Do we have to surrender to the worst in us about all this? Well, the lesson out of the Atlanta public schools is that we shouldn't have tests. How about we, screen our people a little more carefully when we put them in positions of responsibility in the schools? Anyway, judging by outputs is still a matter of debate. We'll be debating it for 10 years, 20 years down the road. But it's important that that is the focus. And I have to say this Department of Education has put great focus on it. And on that, I am with them. Technology. I'm trying to learn it. I'm trying to work with some people who do this. Frankly, when we wrote The Educated Child, Checker Finn and John Cribb and I, we concluded that up to that point, what was that, 90, remember? 99, 89, 79, whatever. Sometime in the last 40 years when we wrote that book, we concluded so far not so good. All this technology, all this whiz-bang, we haven't seen it produce. I mean, those math scores are up a little bit, but for the investment that we've made, I don't think so. It's not there yet. It hasn't delivered yet. I don't think we give up on it. I'm in favor of blended learning, digital learning. I'm in favor of any kind of learning, any kind of way, pretty much. As my professor at Harvard said, well, I don't like pornography, but if it gets them to read, he was talking about the books, not the pictures, obviously. Anyway, but the technology has not delivered. Let me go back now to some larger thoughts and considerations. I want to wrap it up in about 10 minutes so we can have plenty of time for questions. First of all, the first conclusion or general reflection I'd throw out, and we can discuss it, is this trend. As I quoted Checker earlier, the longer you stay in school, the dumber you get, or the less you seem to learn. Put more precisely, I think what it means is that we have, what the numbers mean, if we look at the TIMSS, the PISA, all of these tests, is that we seem to have a pretty good idea of what to do in the early grades. And then as our kids get older, we seem to have less clear of an idea. Cultural issues, I think, enter mightily here. Is that a general cultural truth, that we have a pretty good idea of what to say to 5-year-olds about their behavior, and 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds? Maybe not as clear ideas about what to say to 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And then at 17-year-olds, as Hannah Arendt said, there's a temptation to throw up our hands and say, we can't guide you, we don't know, this is a new world, we don't understand it, good luck. That's a kind of surrender adults shouldn't practice in the presence of the young, but perhaps there is that kind of either agnosticism or at least an unwillingness to say, look, we know some things. We have learned some things from our past, and we wish to impart that to you. In any case, there's something going on here where we lose it. We lose the focus. We lose the concentration. And I wonder if perhaps we lose the confidence in telling our children and urging our children what to read, what to study, what's right for them to do, what's right for them to know, what's right for them to believe. A woman who doesn't is Mrs. Bennett here, who I said retail and wholesale. She really means it. When she leaves here today, you'll be going to the Brightwood schools in D.C. to work with the kids. But I wonder if that's a more general kind of diffidence in the culture about our diffidence about telling people as they get older, young people as they get older, what is worth studying, what is worth doing, what is worth believing. The other thing, of course, in Nation at Risk, I think one of the headlines was, general reflection here, was about math and science. It was about math and science and reading and our poor performance, and we were a nation at risk, and if a foreign power had ceased to take over the country and so on. A little different now. We have concerns about math and reading, but the focus of a lot of my work now is on a different subject, because it turns out our worst subject in America, as you may know, is not math or reading or science. Our worst subject is history, American history, and civics. This is the Atlantic of just a couple days ago. I think, April 10th. When the alarm is sounded over the poor performance of our schools, we usually hear about children's baleful performance in reading, math, and science. On the most recent round of the NAEP, only 1 in 3 U.S. 8th graders scored proficient or higher in these 3 essential subjects. But if that's a crisis, our performance in history and civics is near collapse. A mere 22% of 8th graders score proficient or higher in civics. In history, only 18%. One reason is that our national store of common knowledge has all but disappeared. We increasingly live inside our own information, our own entertainment, and our own cultural bubbles. For a nation that's united not by ties of blood and soil, but by shared ideals, think Lincoln, this is a serious problem. At a conference on civic education at Harvard Law School last week, early May, former Supreme Court Justice David Souter described the U.S. Constitution as a value system. The loss of history and our civic ignorance, he noted, is a defeat of that value system. A disuniting tendency is built into the very fabric of the U.S., he noted. Our shared history and civic ideals are the forces that keep us from flying apart. We lose them at our peril. I think of one great thing at the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Jefferson Lecture. Leszek Kolakowski, when he gave the lecture, talked about a great line. He said, "We remain alien to ourselves in a culture in which our past is denied." There are illegal and undocumented people, illegal aliens, undocumented aliens. There are also people inside the country who have long bloodlines in this country, long ancestry, who are alien to the United States because they don't know it, because they haven't been taught it, because no one has taken the time or the trouble to tell them that in the long story of inhumanity and misery that is human history, the American achievement is high and unique, and it's worth knowing. Not that it's perfect. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was your boss and introduced me in my first job in Washington, said, "Am I embarrassed to speak for a less than perfect democracy? No, I'm not." He said, "Find me a better one." Have we done terrible things in this country? Yes, we have. How have our people found out about them? They found out about them by reading the newspaper, by watching television. Find me a better one, says Moynihan. Well, good task. But most important thing is to know it. And it's a national problem. And I think we are at our peril when our students do not know our country. That has got to be part of the content of any serious curriculum. My third reflection is I want to talk a little bit more and quote a little bit more from Donald Hirsch, because these aren't my ideas, but they've had a great influence on me. I told you that I overruled the National Council memory lane here and gave Hirsch, it was a pretty big award. It's I don't know, $1 or $2 million, I think. It was big money back then. Sound like what's the Michael Myers character? You know what I'm talking about? $1 million. Who? Not Dumb and Dumber. All right, keep going. Who? Dr. Evil, but who? What's his? Austin Powers. I won $1 million. All right. This was a $1 million grant. This was a $2 million grant. No, but it was big. It was big money, serious money. Anyway, Hirsch had the embarrassment of having to live with the fact that I had awarded him the money. So he had to go around to conferences saying, "Well, I don't agree with Bennett. I certainly don't agree with Bennett. I'm grateful for the NEH, but of course that's not Bennett. He's acting for the entire council and the group. You know, we didn't tell the story about overruling the council." But he said, I'm certainly not one of those, conservative types. The guy's a professor at the University of Virginia. He's got to survive. I understand why he did this. Anyway, this went on for years and years and years. Anyway, I read an article about 3 months ago, and I was so moved by it because it encapsulated almost everything at the core of what I believe, what's wrong with American education, the single most important intellectual mistake we are making in American education. And it was written by Don Hirsch. And let me just conclude by reading a few things from it. I'd put this in my own words, but his words are better. He's been at this a long time. He's 85 years old, and there are a few people to whom he must defer, so he just comes right out and says it. He says there's a positive correlation, the research is clear, between a student's vocabulary size in grade 12, the likelihood that he or she will graduate from college, and their future level of income. The reason is clear. Vocabulary size is a convenient proxy for a whole range of educational attainments and abilities, not just skill in reading, writing, listening, and speaking, but also general knowledge of science, history, and the arts. If we want to reduce economic inequality in America, a good place to start is the language arts classroom. From 1945 to 1967, 12th graders' verbal scores on the SAT and other tests had risen, but then these scores plummeted. Cornell economist John Bishop wrote in the 80s of the, quote, historically unprecedented nature of the test score decline that began around 1967. Prior to that year, test scores had been rising for 50 years. The scores reached their nadir around 1980 and have remained low with some bumps up ever since. Why is that? Because of the way we teach. The fastest way to gain a large vocabulary, Hirsch says, through schooling is to follow a systematic curriculum. A systematic curriculum that presents new words in familiar contexts, therefore enabling the student to make correct meanings unconsciously. Spending large amounts of school time on individual word study, the little flip cards, is an inefficient and insufficient route to a bigger vocabulary. You can get there, but it's inefficient and insufficient. A large vocabulary results not from memorizing word lists, but from acquiring knowledge about the social and natural worlds. He then talks, I'm abbreviating obviously and just quoting selectively, the advantages of a content-based curriculum and content-based instruction are enormous. You do it by studying specific domains of knowledge. For the purposes of teaching vocabulary, a domain can be defined as a sphere of knowledge in which concepts and words are repeated over the course of 2 or 3 weeks in the program. The domain approach to literacy, using a coherent content-based curriculum to teach language, is the educational policy of the nations that achieve the best verbal results for both advantaged and disadvantaged students and narrow the gaps between them. Teach the subjects, teach the content, memorize, learn, read it again, use the language again. PISA shows this, the Program for International Student Assessment, as does the TIMSS study. What's the culprit, says Hirsch? The culprit, and I think this is pretty familiar, last 30 years. He says, to make the necessary changes in the United States, an intellectual revolution needs to occur. We need to undo the vast anti-intellectual revolution that took place earlier than the 80s, in the 30s. We can't afford to victimize ourselves further by continued loyalty to outworn and mistaken ideas. Of these, the idea that most requires overturning is how-toism, the notion that schooling should concern itself not with knowledge, which is constantly changing, but rather with giving students the intellectual tools to assimilate new knowledge. He says we get new knowledge by getting old and present knowledge first, on which we build. Stop, he says, stop teaching children to learn how to learn, and instead have them learn something. Have them learn many things. Have them learn them from books, from lectures, even from the internet. So thank you, Don Hirsch. I called him up after I read the article, and I said, you know, Don, I gave you that grant. He said, yeah, I'm always grateful for that. And I said, you never really publicly acknowledged me. You know that, 30 years. This wasn't exactly Jefferson and Adams, but it was a bit of a reconciliation. I said, I just want to tell you, it's fine by me, because you've been right all these years, and you're still right. And I just want to tell you what a great article you wrote, and I hope you keep pushing on it. He, at 85, said, I'm going to push till I'm done. So let's keep pushing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've got a little time for a conversation, and I've got a few questions on my mind, and I suspect others in the room might also, not to mention the worldwide audience. Back to the 3 C's. You've talked a good bit now about content and a bit about choice. You haven't said much about character, Mr. Author of the Book of Virtues. Have we made progress on the character front over 30 years?
That's very hard to know. No clear and systematic study of it has demonstrated either way, but it is still part of education. The reason I haven't said much about it is there is some recent work, Paul Tuff's book on the kinds of qualities that make students succeed. It's very interesting work. He talks about a number of kids in the inner city who IQ may be in testing levels same as everybody else in the school, but they have a certain resilience, a certain tenacity, a certain desire to do it, to succeed, and he calls that a moral virtue, and I think he's right. I think he's right to do that. But the reason I don't say much about it, and not much about it in the context of A Nation at Risk, is that I always fear in talking about it in that context that people will think it is a curricular object, that it is something you do through a curriculum, that you get ethics, that you have a course in ethics, and therefore, having studied ethics, you then become more ethical. If that were true, professors of philosophy would be the most ethical people in the world. I've been there. I've been on those faculties. I've taught philosophy at a number of universities. I'll stick with the engineers by and large. Not all together. I mean, there are some fine philosophers, but the study of it doesn't make you more ethical or contribute to your character. It just makes you able to recognize, talk, and makes you conversant with the subject. I remember when I was teaching ethics, actually, undergraduate ethics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, there was a graduate seminar going on in the evenings on advanced ethical theory. And one night the robot machine broke and on the break, and it was just spewing bottles of soda pop and milk. This is Wisconsin. And cheese, whatever. And the students were grabbing up everything and taking it back to the conference table. And I said, is this an advanced seminar in ethics? Don't you guys realize this? The workman, the guy who does this, is going to probably have to pay this out of his pocket. And they all looked at me stunned and said, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Exactly. Nothing to do with what they're talking about. Look, ethics, Aristotle said, character is taught, through rule, precept, and example. And that's still the case. It's less what you're reading, even if it's the Book of Virtues, and much more who you're in contact with, the quality of that teacher. When we say to students, be ethical, have good character, they look at us and they say, they mean it, or are they just saying this? And then they look to what we do and how we behave. It's not a curricular object. I remember when this thing hit in the late 60s, 70s about how corruption in the marketplace. We had to have seminars in ethics. Lots of corporations organized around having weekend retreats, so you could go from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday and come out more ethical. Not so. Mary Warnock, the great philosopher from Cambridge, says the way to learn how to be a person of character is to be around people of character and to watch them and imitate them. I think that's right.
Thank you. So this is Washington, and the federal government is here, and we're going to talk for a minute about the federal role.
That's what this light is?
Some of it's standing in the back of the room, actually. A Nation at Risk was pure bully pulpit, actually.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with a
Yeah.
program or a grant or a rule or a formula. Content, character, and choice was pure bully pulpit. What Works, the publication we brought out, was pure bully pulpit. None of these had anything to do with what today we call the federal role in education, which has to do with money and rules and the mandatory standards or accountability arrangements or choice arrangements or whatever. And the federal role, as it has evolved over these 30 years, has also become more controversial than I think it was in the days of LBJ, when it sort of got started. And it's also become more partisan, certainly in the last few years. No Child Left Behind, after all, was bipartisan still 10 years ago. And nothing much has been bipartisan in the education sphere lately. Is the federal role part of the solution or part of the problem or altogether irrelevant to...
I think I take issue with your fact that it wasn't controversial then. I seem to remember a few things I got involved in that stirred some hornets' nests. Anyway, I thought, we had our days, we had our moments. I was 2 months ago, I was in Florida giving a talk in southern Florida, and this guy stood up. It was Phil Jones from CBS. He's a little older than I am. He said, "Mr. Secretary, at your opening press conference, I said to you, will these cuts in student loans hurt the students? And you said they'll have to give up their stereos, they'll have to divest themselves of their 3 weeks at the beach." And he said, "We led the CBS Evening News. You made me a star." And I said, well, yeah, it sounded harsh, but I said that the reductions would hurt some people, and they'd have to seriously reconsider what they were doing and maybe take a year off. Other people, I thought it wouldn't be so severe, and some would have to just give up their beer and their stereos in 3 weeks at the beach. Very controversial. Elaine and I were coming back from California. There were 6 editorials that Sunday calling for me to go. And then I got the postcards from the kids in Fort Lauderdale. And they said, "Dear Bill, out of money, send beer, send money, send checks, send government." So, there's truth here in all sense. Anyway, we had our moments, Checker, as you will remember. But the presence and the place of the Department of Education has long been controversial. It was very controversial then, because remember that I would not be confirmed by Lowell Weicker and his committee until Lowell Weicker, Republican senator, got a note from the president saying that he would not abolish the Department of Education. That was a condition. I remember I saw the president. I said, "Look, I don't have to have this job. I can do something else." He said, No, I want you to do it. I said, "I don't have the votes to abolish the department." So we were talking about the abolition of the Department of Education. It still comes up occasionally. But I think people think that's not going to happen. The question is, what is the role of the Department of Education? I've always thought the best role was the bully pulpit. I always thought another very important role was research, to tell the country how it's doing, to tell us how we're doing, probably in the states too. I'd like to think the states could do it on their own, but remember when we did that survey that one year and we found out that all of the states were performing above the median, which is great work if you can get it. All Lake Wobegons, every single one of them. And that was, so you needed an independent, what do we call it, independent audit or assessment. Now I think the worry is, and I have it, is that the department is sometimes just too big. It's too big, exercising too much leverage, too much weight. I agree with Secretary Duncan on a lot of things. I think he stepped forward courageously. If you talk about the Common Core, for example, one of the reasons the whole Common Core debate is in such controversy and difficulty is it's the perception of a lot of people, and I think it's fair, that the federal government threw its weight behind it by saying, you want money, you want to race to the top money, you get behind the Common Core. So now this leads to all sorts of people saying all sorts of things, some of which are true, some of which are not. But I think the proper role for the federal government, whatever else it does, and it's so much bigger now financially than it was when I was there, is to recognize that schools don't get better from Washington. I think Secretary Duncan knows that. And that they get better locally because of good principals, good management, and that states have a greater responsibility here than the federal government. Nevertheless, the federal government, I think, ought to report on how we're doing and exercise that upward leverage to say, look, we just, what did you say? The Common Core standards are progress over, 75% or so?
The Fordham evaluation says they are superior to what 3/4 of the states had come up with on their own.
So upward pressure, maybe not as good as Massachusetts, right? Similar, okay. But that's the sort of thing, that kind of federal audit that we need. But a lot of the times it is a big distraction from getting the work done that you're supposed to get done locally. As far as the bully pulpit versus the Treasury for money, I remember meeting with somebody telling me, it was probably Dr. Greer, that was his job, Deputy Secretary, that there were 263 groups in Washington that represented various educational interests. And as I met with a lot of them, it was clear to me that they thought I worked for them rather than, the American people or the children. So I said, look, I'm the Secretary of Education, not the Secretary of Treasury for Education. I'm not just the check writer here. So, that remains a debatable question. You're going to have it for a long time. I just worry that the balance, not just in terms of, race to the top, which is one particular issue, but just in people focusing so much attention on Washington that they fail to understand what makes a school or a school system good. Take a look at Douglas County Public Schools. See what local leadership has done. May not agree with everything they're doing, but it tells you the parameters of action are broad. You can really decide to do some pretty radical and important things. And when I was out there, they were telling me that the teachers were with them. Good for them.
I do remember you going off for lunch with the head of one of those 263 organizations. I won't name it, but there was a lot of joking about the menu was going to consist of poached shark.
Yeah.
And it was his treat, as I recall.
Yeah, that's right.
You brought up the Common Core, and you made the, I think, correct point that the perception of federal entanglement is a political problem. But that aside, is having common standards in English and math for states that want them a good thing for the country?
Yeah, if the standards are good and the standards are right, yes. And but it's it's all in the details. It's all in the implementation. It's all how you do it, how you assess it, how you put it in, what the reading list becomes. I have not seen the social studies and math, but have you?
Well, the math we've seen, that is part of it.
Not the math.
Yeah.
I mean the
science we've begun to look at, and I certainly we're going to know a lot more in a month on that. I certainly would not say that the mere existence of common standards makes them good standards, or worthy of adoption. But we're talking right now about the two that states are wrestling with, which are
the English and math. And I think for the most part they're pretty good. I think the idea behind it is good. And the idea behind it, unless I'm missing something, is what I subscribe to and what I subscribed to when I was at the National Endowment for the Humanities and Department of Education. How about we all have a common core of books that we read so we can talk to each other, particularly books that have formed our country and formed our culture. I think that's the beginning of it. And then standards and assessment as well. When we talk about this on the radio, we get a whole range of reaction. But a lot of it is, well, I read that they're imposing in Texas the requirements that you got to read every one of Barack Obama's speeches instead of Lincoln. And I said, where is that? I haven't seen that. And I mean, even paranoids have enemies. I understand that. But this is what happens when these things get caught up in the politics. If we could go back to what I say, I don't know how much detail to get into this, what I say to somebody who calls is, let's take those 4 books. Shakespeare, the Bible, you don't have to believe it's the revealed word of God, but it's the seminal book in Western literature, culture. Bible, Shakespeare, plays. founding documents. Don't you believe all American students should have some familiarity with that? Yes. All right, well, let's build it from there. Now, I understand you might end up with a list of, 2,700 titles or 7,200 titles. And you could select, as you could select at any college, a program of instruction which is absolutely noxious, as you could select at almost any college, a program of courses that's absolutely uplifting. So in the implementation of the details. But a cheer and a half, a cheer and 3/4 for Common Core.
We're going to open this up. The worldwide audience has begun to tweet in questions, which people bring me. Let's start with the studio audience. Go ahead. Take a mic. Say who you are.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hansel, and I'm with the Core Knowledge Foundation. So thank you very much for your remarks this morning. I'm sure E.D. Hirsch would really love to have been here if he could.
He can watch it on TV.
I am going to
internet.
send it to him as soon as I get back to my computer.
If not, tell him. And I will go to Virginia like Adams went to Jefferson. I will go to Monticello, hat in hand.
So I just wanted to ask if you could be any more specific in your thoughts about how we go about this intellectual revolution that you mentioned from Hirsch's piece, and the academic knowledge and vocabulary that kids need, it builds really slowly. So one of the points Don Hirsch has made for the past 30 years is that we need to start building in the earliest grades. So how do we get more serious about academics starting from the very beginning of elementary school, if not preschool? Thank you.
You want to try that answer? That? How do we get more serious by getting more serious? I don't know what else to say. But look, if we were there, our style was to, get a few truths out there and pound them and just say them over and over. That's what we did the What Works series. That's what we did a lot of other things.
A little book called James Madison Elementary School.
Yeah, James Madison High School too. And then the reading book. And we said, look, the research shows this works. I mean, Hirsch is not just making something up. There's a lot of research behind this. And so, yes, it builds slowly, but it builds for sure. It builds confidently. I remember when I went to France, the trip I was secretary, and someone had a devilish idea. It was probably you if it was a devilish idea. It was, why don't you go to Japan and give them all our bad ideas? Give them open classroom, give them values clarification, give them estimating and math. Let's see if we can bring them down a few notches and we can move up. But I remember speaking to, it was the deputy minister of education in France. And I said, well, how they doing? I said in my best colloquial American, how the kids doing? He said, it is 10 o'clock. They are all reading their Racine. I said, how are yours doing? I said, it's 10 o'clock. God knows what they're doing. Who knows? We have no idea. But that's America. We do it. It's decentralized. You get more serious by getting more serious. And I think one thing you can do, and one thing you can use the bully pulpit for, is to say, look, some things work and some things don't. And the research shows this is the way, and it's a long way. And if you want to be smart, and you want to, be successful and sound smart and be smart and really have the confidence of your knowledge, you got to read these books. You got to go through this. You got to go through this thicket. And, one of the things that technology does, and I'm not anti-technology, is it tempts us to believe that there's always an easier way, that there's some way to avoid the hard work of instruction and exercise and, sweat, perspiration, perseverance. Our kids had, in math, they had, what was the book? I can't think of it. I'm just Saxon. How'd you know? And they had to do these 30 hard problems every night. And and I remember I did it. I was on the road and I did the math with them, and it was a struggle. But that's how you get there. It's hard to wrestle with angels, Josiah Roy said, but some blessings can't be won any other way. I wasn't the best teacher either. Mrs. Bennett came up one night. I was working with our son John, and she said to me, is it the educational philosophy of the Secretary of Education that the louder you yell at the child, the more likely he will grasp what it is you're saying? Yeah.
That's how I handle foreign travel.
You yell louder in
English. Don't
English.
understand English, you yell louder. But you and Elaine have been a very exemplary two-parent family, and a couple of questions that have come in have really asked these questions: whether education problem today is also associated with broader cultural and demographic difficulties in the society.
No question. And I should have said something about it. No question. Your boss and my mentor, friend, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, when he was leaving office, when he was asked, what's the biggest change you have seen in your, 40 years? He said the change in the family, all across, I think he said, the North Atlantic. The decomposition of the family, the collapse of the family is the greatest and most consequential change. It makes a difference. They haven't all collapsed, but obviously it makes a difference. It may have a lot to do with what we're talking about when we talk about these achievement levels and not having as much confidence in the later years when they become more difficult to handle and respond to. And the questions become more complex. Well, why can't I do that? And why can't I have permission here or there? I think Moynihan was right. I think Charles Murray, we're here partly under the sponsorship of AEI, Charles Murray's work on coming apart. The loss of belief. How do you, if Murray's right, let's not assume he is, but if Murray is right, that we have seen an attenuation of the intensity of belief in things like hard work, the family, in religious belief, in the rule of law, can we really believe that this won't have an effect on education? Let's take it from the teacher's point of view. One of the great things about visiting the schools and talking with principals and teachers was to say, what do you, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you like? I remember I was asked that my first week. Another thing I got in trouble for, you remember, they said, if you could wave a magic wand and change American education, what's the one thing you'd change? I said I would get rid of puberty. And I said it just causes a lot of problems, a lot of distraction. They say, conservative, these conservatives, they're opposed to sex, they're opposed to puberty, they're opposed to everything. No. I said, it's kind of a distraction. Have you been to a middle school? It vibrates, the building vibrates, But when you ask the teachers, the principals, most of the good ones I met, and I met some great ones, will say, if parents would do their job. I remember Amy Weiss-Nuria at the LaSalle Language Academy in Chicago said, if you'll get them here on time with a good breakfast, or early and we'll give them breakfast, with the right attitude, listen to the teachers, do what you're supposed to do the homework, and not let them watch TV till the homework's done, we'll do the rest. And I remember Amy saying, you would be surprised, an awful lot of parents can't meet that standard. That's not the homeschooling model. That's the other end. So of course it makes a difference.
So how do you feel about the high-touch wraparound schools, the KIPP-style schools that are trying in some ways to substitute for the lack of other positive influences in these kids' lives?
Well, yeah. I mean, James Q. Wilson, recently deceased, told us that we better face up to the fact that sooner or later, if we want something like educational equality, we better be thinking about more orphanages. Maybe that's the unfortunate word, more residential educational settings. Remember, that was in Waiting for Superman as well. If you really want to give kids this opportunity, and that may be the case. When you look at the circumstances of some kids in this city and other cities, you wonder how they made it. We had 2 boys. That's it. We had 2 of us, 2 of them, even match. You think you could prevail, wouldn't you? You think you could prevail? We prevailed, but, it was touch and go from time to time. Our younger one, he's off today to Pendleton. He's a first lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps, so something of his mother got through to him. If you got a Marine, thank a mother. But I don't mean to say that. He wasn't a bad kid. He wasn't a problem kid. But he was a boy. He's still a boy. They do these things when they're teenagers, and you work on them, and you try to be 2 parents, and you try to be responsible. You went through it even with your brilliant kids, I believe. I remember frustration. Go ahead, everybody can tell their stories. But when you see kids who have just very little in the way of home support and nurture, Nisbet, it was Robert Nisbet who said, for a child to succeed, he has to have two requirements. There has to be someone some adult who's absolutely crazy about that child. At least one adult who's absolutely crazy about that kid. Preferably two. And second, in his life, the forces of composition have to outweigh the forces of decomposition. And if you look at the lives of a lot of kids and the state of the culture, it's easy to see the forces of decomposition can hold sway.
One more from the crowd. Who has one? Go right ahead. Identify yourself, Jim.
Jim Colmoose from Edge.
Jim Coleman?
Colmoose.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Coleman, alas, is
Coleman
not
is-
present.
No, my God, I was going to say, you really brought him back today. James
Right.
Coleman is here. I'm sorry. Excuse me, sir.
Whoa. I don't know I think I forgot my question.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I shouldn't do that. I'm sorry.
No, you said that the civic education issue is a
yeah.
national problem that puts our country at peril, and I happen to agree with you on that. I'm just wondering if it is a national issue, is it something that the federal government should try to somehow get involved with?
Well, again, yes, certainly at the level of the bully pulpit. But, I have this book coming out as college worth. And you can go through the entire Ivy League and see not one school requires a course in American history to graduate. It was just part of a review on a review of the Bowdoin curriculum. History majors can graduate at Bowdoin without taking a course in American history. What are we talking about here? How is this possible? It's our worst subject. And yes, at least the bully pulpit, but no, this ought to be part of what every state mandates. It ought to be in the schools. I have friends who, like Dr. Greer, are working at getting the Federalist Papers taught in every school in America. Sure, it should be. It just should occur. It just should happen sometime in the life of a child, a young man or woman growing up in America, that someone makes the case for America. Pro and con, the good things and the bad things, but makes the case for the kind of country you live in. That's a special place with a special history. I've been thinking about the Tsarnaev boys, and they're not good examples of anything. But I just wonder, the family finally gets political asylum. I just wonder through Cambridge Rindge Latin and through their entire childhood and growing up, other than Uncle Ruslan from Maryland, did they run? Apparently, they had some guy named Misha who was telling them about good to blow up bombs, hate women, and not study music. But did they ever run into a group of adults, a community of adults, several adults, who said, your parents sought political asylum here. There's a reason they sought political asylum here. This isn't a country that you should hate. This isn't a country you should want to blow up. This is the last best hope of Earth, and even with all its faults. So when we say at its peril, it could really be at its peril. But see, I just don't think this one's hard. I just think, and there are some states that are doing some stuff about this, doing things about this. I'm working with them to teach American history and to teach it not just once, not just in the junior year, the survey, but in 6th and 7th and 8th, and then again in high school. Because some of these things, some of those things Lincoln said are worth hearing a couple of times.
Thank you very much. We
Thank
have
you.
a lot of
Thank you.
people in the room with a lot of things they have to do in the next hour, including you and Elaine seeing off your son to Camp Pendleton. I think we are going to, let me just repeat that the video that you alluded to, joint venture of Fordham and AEI, is on the website now. It's 25 minutes. It is a commemoration with some very interesting remarks, including yours, of 30 years of A Nation at Risk, and recommend everybody watching it. And we thank you for being here today and around the world. And why don't you join me in thanking
Thank
Secretary
you.
Bennett?
Yeah.